Greetings and salutations, young true believers. So, today we'll talk about epistemology, and epistemology is the philosophical study of knowledge. So, epistemology has historically been dominated by uh, two main schools of thought. The first is rationalism, which has historically been represented by thinkers such as Rene Descartes. And if that name sounds familiar, you probably remember it from a math class. He invented coordinate geometry. Baruch Spinoza, famous Portuguese Jewish philosopher who had a bizarre concept of God. He believed that God was identical with the universe, you know, as pantheism. Um, and then G.W. Leibniz, who if that name sounds familiar to you, it's because he co-invented calculus with Sir Isaac Newton. So whenever you have to take a calculus class, remember you can blame two philosophers. But what is rationalism? Rationalism is the view that all human knowledge is arbitrated, if you will, by reason. In other words, it's not that we don't learn things through our senses, according to the rationalists. That's a common misconception. We do, in fact, learn things through our senses, but the rationalists argue, look, the final arbiter, the clearinghouse, if you will, for what we know is reason. The use of reason results in certainty, and certainty is knowledge. Sensory evidence is not knowledge. So this, to give you an example of what we're talking about, this harkens back to Descartes' famous book, The Meditations, in which Descartes strips away everything that he thought he knew. He calls into doubt everything he thought he knew, the external world, God, his own body, other minds, right? And he entertains the possibility that maybe he is being deceived by a wicked demon who has nothing better to do with its time than to deceive Descartes. He entertains the possibility that life is a dream. He could be dreaming everything, right? And in the midst of all this despair, all this what's known as hyperbolic doubt, hyperbole being a logical fallacy or rhetorical device whereby we exaggerate things. So if someone's been out drinking and they feel like they got hit by a bus, that's hyperbole. In the midst of all this hyperbolic doubt, Descartes stumbles upon the thing that he cannot call into question, the thing that he cannot doubt. The thing that he cannot doubt is that thought is occurring. And if thought's occurring, there must be a thinker. And he is that thinking thing. He is, in Latin, e res cogitans. And he says triumphantly, cogito ergo sum, which is Latin for I'm thinking, therefore I exist. Now, Descartes realizes that at the end of this meditation, the end of the second meditation, he's only got himself, though. This is a philosophical view known as solipsism, the view that you're the only thing that exists in the universe, right? This is a position that no philosopher likes, right? This is obviously not tenable, so Descartes realizes he has to get out of this. So he goes rummaging about in the contents of his head, and what he finds is that he's got, as he calls them, innate ideas, right? This is a view now known today in philosophy as nativism, the idea that human beings are just born with certain ideas. One of the ideas that Descartes finds when he's thinking about the contents of his mind is perfection, and he asks, what did I used to think was perfect? What did I equate with perfection? He says, oh yes, God. And because he knows that God is all good, and you can know that God's all good because it's part and parcel of the definition of God. So at the beginning of the third meditation, Descartes offers up a proof for the existence of God that is essentially St. Anselm's ontological proof. But because goodness is part of the definition of God, God can't be a deceiver, because human beings deceive one another to gain benefits. It benefits them somehow, right? We deceive each other for amusement or to gain something. But God, being perfect, doesn't need to be amused. God doesn't gain anything from deceiving us. You can be sure that God isn't a deceiver. And because God created you and isn't a deceiver, that means you can rely on your sensory knowledge, right? And to drive home this point that true human knowledge is certainty. It's certainty based in reason, as Descartes puts it, clear and distinct ideas. He offers up a thought experiment. Thought experiments, get comfortable with these, right? Daniel Dennett, an American philosopher, calls them what is his term for it? Bear with me here for a second. Not thought experiments. What does he call them? I'll come back to it. Don't get old. But anyway, the famous wax experiment. So Descartes asks you to imagine he's keeping bees, and he takes a honeycomb out of the beehive, right? And he asks you to consider the sensory qualities of the beehive, or the honeycomb that he took out of the beehive, rather. And it's cool to the touch. It has a yellowish, kind of pale yellow color. It smells like the wildflowers that the bees collected the pollen from. It's got honey dripping from it. You can taste the honey. You rap on it with your knuckle and make it a little dull sound, right? So Descartes asks, how do I know that the honeycomb exists? Well, I know it through my senses. But then he asks you to consider that he takes the honeycomb and he sets it down by the fire and he goes to attend to another matter, and he comes back half an hour later and the honeycomb is melted. Now it's not yellow. It's just a pale white. It's certainly not solid. It's not cool. You can't smell the flowers anymore. You can't taste the honey. All the sensory characteristics have changed. How do I know that the melted glob of goop is the same thing that was as the solid honeycomb that was there before? The answer on Descartes' behalf is, I thought that I knew the existence of the honeycomb through my senses, but I didn't. I knew it through reason. That's how I know that this thing, the melted glob, is the same thing as the solid honeycomb that was there a minute ago, right? I've heard philosophers who despise Descartes argue they think this is a really, how do they put it, a clever argument, right? It's a clever argument, and it's on their view convincing, right? Now, obviously, there are opposing viewpoints to rationalism. But one last consideration, Descartes and rationalism. What about this possibility that life could be a dream? Well, Descartes argues that we can readily discern, we can know that life isn't a dream. How can we know that life isn't a dream? Well, Descartes asks you to consider, your dreams last night. They probably were a little wild and disjointed. Most people's dreams tend to be like that, right? So Descartes argues, well, that's your criterion, right? Because the events in waking life, right, unfold in a logical manner. You woke up, you brushed your teeth, you jumped in the shower, you worked out, right? You ate something, right? And you sat down, you opened up your computer. But in dreams, obviously, you can do things in a very disjointed and illogical manner, right? And that's how we discern dreaming from waking life, right? The events in waking life always invariably unfold in a rational manner.